Thanks for starting the recording. So welcome everyone to the Intermediate Excel Skills to Tell Your Program Story workshop. This is the second workshop in a series of 2. And in today's workshop, we'll build on what we learned last week in the Introduction to Excel workshop. But you do not need to have attended the intro workshop to follow along with us today. We'll be recording, like Georgie said, and started the recording, so thank you. Additionally, we'd love if you could put your name and your organization in the chat. We'd love to see who all is here with us today. My name is Lizzie, and I'm a Senior Social Impact Evaluation Manager at Cardea, and I'll be co-facilitating with my colleague, Olivia. So we are so happy to see so many familiar faces and names, and also love the opportunity to meet those of you who we haven't met yet. This is a little bit about Cardea. We are a women of color-led nonprofit. We have an office in Seattle, and we have a number of our folks from our social impact and evaluation team here today. You'll be primarily hearing from myself and my colleague Olivia, and then we will have an opportunity for a smaller breakout room where you'll have a chance to connect with another Cardea facilitator as well. These are our learning objectives for today. By the end of the workshop, you will practice data cleaning and restructuring through the VLOOKUP function, analyze data by making pivot tables, and create data visualizations. We hope that you leave the workshop with a few new or refreshed Excel skills. In our 90 minutes together, we'll spend most of our time talking about the VLOOKUP function, pivot tables, charts, and slicers. We'll go over the concepts using the PowerPoint slides, and then we'll switch over to Excel to do a live demonstration of the skills. After the demonstration, you'll have the opportunity to ask questions and practice the skills in a small group breakout room. And each room will have a Cardea staff person to help answer questions and go through the activity. My colleague Avanti will put a practice data set made up of fake data into the chat. Please download this to your computer to use in the breakout rooms. After the workshop, we'll send the recording, the slides, the fake data set, and a step-by-step how-to guide with screenshots and a description on what we go over. So before we jump into Excel, we wanted to pause and invite you to follow along with these statements while doing something that feels right to you, like pumping your fist in the air, high-fiving yourself, or standing up. Just a little bit of an encouragement as we go into Excel. You can do this. You already are a data person. Remember to channel your strengths from other work areas. There's more commonality in skills than you may realize. Be patient with yourself, and you are not alone. I am Googling things always related to Excel, so we're all Googling. Okay. First, we wanted to spend a quick moment reviewing the content covered in Workshop 1, which was held last Thursday. So my colleagues, Avanti and Olivia, covered a great amount of material in the first workshop. They covered basic workshop features, such as an overview of cells, columns, rows, and the ribbon tabs across the top of Excel, adding and deleting a worksheet, and hiding and unhiding rows and columns. They discussed data entry and quality assurance tools, such as cell formatting, the freeze frame tool, and simple formulas. They also briefed us on cleaning data with basic tools, including the filter, conditional formatting, and find and replace. So really, they covered a lot. Thank you both for that workshop. We'll be using some of these concepts in our work today. Now we will start with an overview of what VLOOKUP is. Like I mentioned, we'll go over it in a slide, and then we'll do a demo. Okay. VLOOKUP stands for vertical lookup. It's a built-in Excel function that helps you look for a specified value by searching for it vertically across the sheet. VLOOKUP may sound complicated, but we hope you'll find out once we do the demo and you try it yourself that it's pretty easy and useful. We're using it today to help us recode variables quickly. The function itself is in black bold font on the slide. You can see that the function is made up of 4 parts, and those 4 parts are in brackets in the parentheses in the function. The first part is the value that you want to look up. Then you insert the range in which you want to find the value and the return value. Then you insert the number of columns within your defined range, and then you add whether or not you want the function to provide you with an exact match or an approximate match. And it's easy to sort of talk about it, but I think it really helps to do a demo to see how to use each of these pieces. I also want to share a quick note that there are other formulas and functions in Excel that can produce a similar result. These include XLOOKUP and index match, but for the purposes of today, we're really focusing on VLOOKUP. Okay, I'm going to switch over to Excel. Again, I invite you all to download the practice data set that Avanti included in the chat if you'd like to, and if you're able to with your computer setup. You can open that up and follow along with the demo. Excuse me, but my throat is I have a little bit of a frog in my throat, so don't mind me if I pause to take a sip of water. So this Excel sheet is essentially fake data. We're pretending that this is data from a young adult program, a teen program. Our data set includes column A, which has our ID number, the identification number of the youth who are participants in our program. We have their grade information, their race and ethnicity, their gender and zip code. We also have data related to the outcomes of the program. So in this pretend scenario, we are pretending that our program is complete, and we have done surveys with these youth to ask them about their satisfaction with the program. So we have satisfaction information. We also have data saying whether or not they've completed 75% more of the programming, if they were connected with supportive services, and to what extent they feel hopeful and optimistic about their future, and if they have improved knowledge or skills after participating in the program. Okay, so with this data, in our pretend scenario, we are reporting satisfaction. How we have the satisfaction in our data set now is with 4 categories. I turned on my filter, so you can see here there's a little arrow. I can click on that and quickly see what my 4 categories are. In this pretend scenario, I need to report satisfaction by yes, no. Were they satisfied, yes or no? So I need to recode my data. Since I'll be editing my data, the first thing that I want to do is create a copy of my data set. So to do that, I'll click on Source tab at the bottom, right click, and then click on Move or Copy. I'm selecting Move to the end and creating a copy. When I do that, it creates an exact copy of my data set in a new tab. I want to do this so that just in case something happens in my work, I have another source data set that I can reference or go back to. You can also copy the entire Excel sheet into another sheet if you'd like, just ensuring that you have a backup. So now we're going to start working with our VLOOKUP. To do that, I'm going to create a new blank column to work in. I'm going to click to the right of the satisfaction and click Insert. And that will insert a blank column and move my other data over. I will label this recode, satisfaction recode. One of the pieces of the VLOOKUP function is to create a reference table, which I will do in some of the white space in my data set. But just so that we can see it all on one screen while I'm screen sharing, I'm going to go ahead and hide the columns that I don't need right now. I'll highlight them, right click, and then click on hide. My columns of data are still there. They're just hidden. You can it's kind of hard to see, but well, you can at least see the letters go from G to L. When I want to unhide, I can click on it again and click unhide. So at this point in time, I'm going to create a reference table for my recode for VLOOKUP to use to reference. I'm going to do that by typing it out. First, I'm creating headers, and then I'm typing in the data that exists currently in my satisfaction. Let's see, so satisfied, very satisfied. Unsatisfied, very unsatisfied. So that's what my data currently looks like. And I'm going to recode. I see Carol has a hand up. I'll pause here for Carol's question.
Yeah, I just wanted to ask if there's a specific preference on the order, or it doesn't matter.
No, it doesn't matter in this case.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, in this case, this is like our reference table. And so the function will look across this table, and what it's essentially doing is matching from reference to our original data set. So it can be in whatever order. What really matters is that the recode value is what you want your new variable to be. So in our case, we want it to be yes. So simplifying, if people are satisfied, in the recode, it's just yes or no. Okay, so now we can format this into a table, which just makes it a little bit easier to see. So to do that, you can highlight the cells. I've been having some trouble with my mouse. But you highlight the cells, and then on the top ribbon under Home, there is a tool here called Format as Table, which you can click and select whatever color or format you are interested in. And because I've highlighted what I'm interested in creating as a table, it is in a gray shaded with the green out around it. So that is what I want to be a table. And my table has headers, satisfaction and recode. So I will click that check mark. So now Excel sees this as a formal table, and it formatted it to match the style I selected. Okay, now that we have that reference table, we can work on writing our function. I will demonstrate two different ways to write the function. It will be the same function, just two different ways to do it. First, I'll just be typing it out freehand in the cell. So when you start a function in Excel, you start with an equal sign. You can see I'm typing it in the first cell of my new recode column. As I type, you'll also see it up here in this function line. And if you want, you could do your typing here. It will put your information in the cell that you have highlighted. So when we're working with a function in Excel, we first type the name of it to tell Excel what function we're interested in using. And in this case, it's just writing out VLOOKUP. You'll see once you do that, Excel pulls up the 4 components that we talked about. So you can sort of reference the pieces you need. The first is the lookup value. The lookup value is your reference data. And to see this, I will just click my reference cell that is in the same, also row 2 of where I'm typing, so F2. Then I'll do a comma. The comma tells the function to move on to the next piece. The next piece you can see is your table array. So this is a reference to the table that you created. Here as I highlighted that, you'll see that it automatically wrote in table 2, all because we formatted as a table, so Excel recognizes this chunk of information as a table. The next piece is the column index number. Essentially, it's asking how many columns are in your table and where in the column do you want your new information to be pulled from. Our table has 2 columns, so I will type 2. Finally, VLOOKUP can share with you an approximate match or an exact match. In this case, we want an exact match. And what that means is whenever Excel or the VLOOKUP sees our information in column F, we want it to match exactly to our table reference of yes. So there are 2 ways to do this. You can either click on this false to be exact or write false. You could also type 0 for false. Excel understands 0 to be false in this case, and 1 would be true. Okay, and then you close the parenthesis. So those are your 4 pieces, and you can press enter, and you'll see that in the cell is your recode. Yes, and maybe if you have an error, then something is wrong with the formula, and you can go back and kind of troubleshoot. Now, essentially, because currently it looks like our formula is okay, we're going to copy this formula down throughout the column to apply it to all of these. So to do that, you'll see in the bottom right hand, there's a green square where you can double click, and that will automatically copy your formula down. So you can see we've now quickly recoded this using VLOOKUP. Although we do have a couple of errors, and that is this NA. Essentially, in this case, the error is because there's nothing for the VLOOKUP to reference in our reference cell. The reference cell is blank. In our pretend scenario, this person either didn't answer a question or they didn't take the survey, something like that. We don't have satisfaction data for them. There is a way we can further adjust our VLOOKUP function to account for that, so that instead of saying like error NA, it will say missing, unknown, or something else. So to do that, I'm going to click back into my top cell and adjust my function. I'm going to use if error. If error is saying to Excel, if there is an error in the VLOOKUP, then comma. Comma means then you can write missing. And I'm putting it in quotation marks. Tell Excel it's like a word to write missing. And then another close parenthesis. Then I will copy that down through my cells. And so now it sees this cell was an error because there was an NA. And so it just wrote in missing. Like I mentioned, there is another pathway to getting this function written that I'll show you now. Okay. So the other pathway is, I cleared just this top cell, is the insert function tool in the ribbon area. It's this FX. So this tool you can use for functions in Excel. It knows I want to do VLOOKUP because I've been working on this in preparation. But you can essentially select the function you want, and then it shows you these arguments. So like I mentioned, there are 4 pieces to a VLOOKUP, and this tells you each of those 4 things, and you can enter them in. So my cursor is in lookup value, so I can click each of the pieces that I did before. I just don't have to like type them in the bar. Instead, I'm just filling them out in this tool. And so that's just another way to go about that. Okay, we've made it through our demo. Now we have time to go into breakout rooms. In the breakout room, you'll be in a small group and you can ask all your questions. Each breakout room will have a Cardea staff person to help you. And together you can recode one of the other variables, have a similar response, pretending you need to have yes, no, unknown, or missing. Practice using VLOOKUP, and the Cardea folks will be supporting you.
So I hope you all had a good time in your breakout groups and feel that you've at least strengthened your confidence in the VLOOKUP function and how to do that on your own. Next, we are going to pivot to focusing in on a few other components within Excel, including pivot tables, charts, and slicers. Similar to how Lizzie ran through some content earlier, I'll be going through a few slides and reviewing these components at a high level, then pivoting over to Excel to do demonstrations, and then we'll go into breakout groups so that you can do some practice and ask some questions. So first, pivot tables. What are pivot tables? These are essentially a tool in Excel that's used to create summary data tables. And through a pivot table, you can summarize, sort, reorganize, group, count, total, and average the data in your data set. And one of the nice things about a pivot table is that it does calculations for you without you having to write formulas for things like sums and averages. It also lets you quickly disaggregate your data to see outcomes by various demographic characteristics. The next tool we'd like to elevate is slicers. And slicers provide buttons that you can click on to filter the data in your pivot tables. And you can also tie them to charts that are generated from your pivot table. They'll make your data more interactive than static. So you can click on the various demographic categories that you might have. So in this example, we have gender identity and race ethnicity. So you would be able to click on those light blue buttons to see how the data changed if, say, you're only interested in looking at females in your data set or males in your data set. And finally, we have charts. And you can also have these tied to your pivot tables and to your slicers. So there's a way of visualizing information and also making them interactive. So that was a quick run through of those 3 pieces that we'll be reviewing. So I'm going to stop share for a moment so that I can pivot over to end the slideshow. Your patience with me as I struggle to get this to work. I'm also trying to make the display a lot larger because we heard from some previous workshop participants that it was a little bit challenging to see the buttons within the Excel program. So I'm trying to make those more visible. Okay, I think this should, apologies, it's not giving me the Excel program as an option to share. Just a minute. Okay, hopefully you're all seeing the Excel file now and seeing the green around it on my end. So that's a good indicator that that should be what you're viewing on your end. So I'll walk through how to create the various examples that we just went through. So pivot tables, slicers, and charts. The first thing we talked about was a pivot table. So I'll start with adding that into our data set. And I'm working, assuming that we've completed our recodes of hopeful about the future. And if we are wanting to add in a pivot table, we can just click anywhere within this data set and go to the Insert tab and click Pivot Table. And you'll see that this dialog box comes up. We also see how it's outlining the rows and columns that it is proposing that we use within our pivot table. We can see that Excel is pretty smart. It's including all of the data that we have within our data set, which is great. And we do want to put it on a new worksheet. So how this pops up is accurate, and we'll click OK. And we'll see that now there's this sheet 1 that has been added to our workbook. And just so we know what we're working with, rather than having a generic label, we'll double click within the tab to change the name of the sheet. And I'll call it a pivot table exercise. So that's there. And we'll practice pulling in the satisfaction recode data that Lizzie shared earlier. So in order to get that summarized in our table, we're going to drag down satisfaction recode to rows, and we're also going to drag it down to values. And we'll see how this table appears here. And what it's showing us right now are counts of no, unknown, and yes, which is useful, but we're thinking ahead that maybe we're going to want to create a data visualization out of this. So percent would be a more meaningful way to summarize the data. And we can change that by, in our values, clicking on this little caret here, and then value field settings. And rather than doing a count, we want a percent. So we're going to do show values as, and we want it to be percent of the grand total. And we'll click OK. And we see now how the way that the data are summarized in our table has changed to being percents. Also thinking ahead to creating a chart out of this information, going to 2 decimal places is probably more precise than we would want. And we can change the way that our data are displayed by select the data and then clicking up here in the numbers group on the home tab to decrease the decimal places over to 2 so that it is just whole numbers. Next, we are going to think about adding in slicers to our pivot table to understand how our data change based on some of the demographic characteristics within our data set. So we can click anywhere within our pivot table and then go to the insert group within our ribbon, and we want to insert slicer. And you'll see that with the slicers, it brings up the different variables within our data set. In the example that we walked through in the slides, we had race, ethnicity, and gender identity as our slicers. So we'll replicate that here and click OK. And we see that these 2 slicers are popping up now. I'm just going to move them so they're not stacked on top of each other. And maybe we want to have the labels for these slicers be a little bit cleaner rather than having the underscore in them. So we'll right click on this slicer to be able to bring up the slicer settings. And this is where we can change the display header. We just want to remove the underscore, kind of a simple style change there. And we'll do the same thing for race ethnicity. So we'll click on that slicer, then right click, select slicer settings, and remove the underscore. And now to show you how these interact with our pivot table, we can click on a demographic category. So maybe we want to know how Hispanic and Latino participants felt about satisfaction. And we see that our data has changed because we don't have the unknown category. And you'll see also at the top how there's this thing that looks like a checklist, which allows you to do multi-select. So we have that toggled on now. And maybe we want to pull in 2 demographic groups or 3, and we can see how the data in our table change. To clear the filter, you would click on the funnel with the red X in the lower corner. And now that resets the pivot table. And just for purposes of demonstration, I'll also click on our gender identity slicer too, to show you how the data is pivoted. Lastly, we want to show you how to add in a chart. So again, we'll click within our pivot table so it knows where we're pulling information from. We'll again go to the Insert tab and select Recommended Charts. And this is a way for quickly identifying like what type of chart might be the best. Sometimes Excel gets it right, sometimes not. But you'll also notice that you can preview other ways of displaying the data. Say you knew that you wanted to do a pie chart instead of a column chart, or maybe you wanted a bar chart. And, we'll show you what it will look like, but we'll stick with the recommended one for now and say, okay. And then our chart appears on our page here. Again, just for having less overlapping content, I'm going to move our table down, sorry, our chart down, and we have that there. So a few other things that you might want to consider when creating your data visualizations are ways to make it easier for an audience to understand like what's the key takeaway. So we'll just recommend a few stylistic things that you can do. One thing might be to change the title of your chart, since total doesn't really represent what's being shown here. So we can click on that, and then we can right click and select Format Chart Title. Actually, we can just double click within it, and then we can adjust it. So I think this is like satisfaction with programming. So that is a more descriptive title, and then we don't need the legend, so we can click on it, and then we can right click and select delete to get rid of it. Some other pieces might be to adjust the vertical axis or the Y axis so that it goes from 0 to 100% rather than 70%, because this might sort of inflate some of the differences that you're seeing by focusing in on that lower level. So we will we'll select the axis and then right click to select Format Axis. And it shows you what the bounds are for the minimum and maximum. We'll adjust this to be 100%, then click out of it so it changes the scaling there. Another thing might be to add in data labels. So you can do this by clicking on one of the elements, and you'll see how there are these bubbles around sort of the four corners of the column chart. And then you can right click and select Add Data Labels. And they'll appear there. Another way to do this would be to click on this plus sign here for chart elements, and it's going to show you all the different chart elements, and then select data labels, and we can see that there are various options for where you place them. I often find it's outside and makes the most sense, so we'll go with that. And now we have data labels within our chart. Another piece to consider might be getting rid of the grid lines, which can be distracting for some folks who are looking at the figure. And by clicking on them, you'll see that we have these bubbles again on the ends, and then you can just hit delete on your keyboard and they will go away. Finally, we have these buttons about sort of the interactive parts of our chart, but we find that distracting. So if we hover over it, we can then go to hide all field buttons on chart, and that will make those disappear. So we just see more of the chart. But just to show you how it is connected with our pivot tables and slicers, we can click on some of the content here to see how our chart can change as well. And that takes us through the demonstration of those three components of Excel. I will take a moment to see if there's any questions before we go rooms to practice adding these elements within the data sets that we have, maybe using the hopeful about the future recode if you were able to do that in your groups previously. Does anyone have questions before we go to breakout? Let me pull up the breakout room slide then. You have to toggle back to PowerPoint. Okay. So now we're going to spend some time in breakout rooms once again. And you can review together with your Cardea person about how to create a pivot table, how to create slicers, and then how to create a chart. consider using a different variable within the data set if you would like, or mimicking what I just demonstrated. You can also think about different types of slicers that you might add. Maybe you want to focus on zip code instead of gender identity, whatever kind of you're curious about. Well, thank you everyone for actively participating in the breakout groups. Hopefully that was good use of time to walk through some pivot table, chart, and slicer creation, or maybe some other questions that you had about content that we covered earlier. We wanted to share a few resources to continue self-guided Excel learning, and we'll email step-by-step guide from this presentation following the workshop, as well as the slides and the data set again, so you can continue to practice. There are also a few videos here that we think you might find useful if you want to dive in a little bit deeper into some of it. I think I might be passing to Georgie to review the data and evaluation capacity building reminder, but I'm also happy to voice over that, Georgie, if you weren't expecting that. Apologies.
Oh, no worries. Get my camera on here. Well, thank you so much. Yes, I wanted to just give a quick reminder that if you receive Best Starts for Kids funding, you can receive free capacity building through our capacity building program. So the folks on the left of this slide are the consultants who specifically provide data and evaluation capacity building, and they include Cardea, but there's also the Capacity Collective, Crux, and the Puget Sound Educational Service District. The capacity builders can provide a wide array of data and evaluation support. They could be things like helping you with designing an evaluation, for example, helping you develop a logic model or research questions. They can also help with data collection, like designing a survey or focus group questions, or they can help you build skills to analyze and report your own data to funders. And capacity builders can also help partners to build a new or modify an existing database. So those are just a few things that the data and evaluation capacity builders can do. We also have many other types of capacity building support available, including finance, IT, human resources, organizational development, fund development, and more. If you're currently funded by Best Starts, please feel free to reach out to me anytime to get connected to a capacity builder and take advantage of this additional benefit of being funded by Best Starts for Kids. I'm going to put my email in the chat. And I think that's it. Thank you for giving me a minute to talk about that.
Yeah, thanks for voicing that over. Appreciate it. You did it much better than I could. Finally, we just want to take the opportunity to get some feedback from you all. We have a survey that just asks, like, how did this workshop go for you? And I want to share that we read through the responses and we apply what we learned from the surveys into future workshops. So it's really valuable to hear your voice and your feedback so that we can continue to improve and make these useful for Best Starts for Kids partners. You can scan the QR code, and I think we'll probably drop the link in chat as well. Thank you, everybody. We hope you have a lovely afternoon.